On the last episode of the Keepsake box. A few hours in, I slipped off my flats and extended my feet onto Ken's lap. He started rubbing them, just as I knew he would. Just as he did the week prior, Ken started rubbing my legs. He started from the bottom and worked his way up. He positioned his body on top of mine as we kissed and rubbed each other. Again, I felt the uncontrollable saturation. Once again, Ken was hard. I could tell that his penis was strategically placed exactly where he wanted it. Ken started kissing my neck, and he whispered into my ear, "I want to make love to you." Although I was very much aware of his intent by that point, hearing him say it was incredibly intriguing. In my 15-year-old mind, it was simultaneously the sexiest and most romantic moment in my life. I'm over the age of 30 and is still a contender. Ken stood and pulled down his sweatpants and boxers. That's when everything good about the experience came to an end. I became incredibly nervous when I saw his penis in real life. Even by my adult standards, I'm very much aware that Ken's penis was incredibly large. I remember thinking that there's no way that all of that was going to fit inside of me. Ken grabbed his penis and attempted to guide it inside. That was the exact moment when expectation was replaced with reality. I was expecting a pleasurable experience, but it hurt. It really hurt. I reached down and touched Ken's penis. It was less than halfway in, and I was already ready for it to be over. He slowly worked himself inside, pausing whenever he thought I was uncomfortable. None of it was particularly pleasurable, but I can't imagine how much worse it would have been if Ken hadn't cared enough to take his time. It was quick, much quicker than I'd prefer present day. But that day, I was ever so grateful for the brief sexual encounter. There was no orgasm on my part, and I didn't even care. After Ken was done, he rested his head on my chest. He was breathing hard, and I could feel his heart beating wildly on my leg. Meanwhile, I laid there wondering why any woman would ever agree to have sex on her own accord. Chapter 15, Feelings and Fellowship. Narrated by Shandora Warren. A month into summer break, we went to church. It should have been like any ordinary Sunday, only it wasn't. Since I no longer considered myself to be Ron's first lady, I forfeited my seat in the front row. I took advantage of the opportunity to be away from his direct line of sight in most cases. Cassidy and I sat in a pew near the rear of the church. Immediately to my right was a girl named Melanie. Melanie was around my age, but she attended a different school. She seemed pleasant enough, but I didn't really know her. Throughout the service, Cassidy repeatedly dropped her toy and whined for me to pick it up. My immediate inclination was to ignore her, but I didn't want to alert Ron to my inattentiveness. I reached down for what seemed to be the 50th time to retrieve Cassidy's toy. As I bent over, I noticed that there was a Polaroid picture on the floor. It was turned upside down. It was my fullest intention to turn the photo over to view it, but just as I was about to do so, Melanie snatched it out of my hand. I was so surprised by her behavior that I lacked the ability to appropriately respond. She seemed surprised as well, as if she hadn't committed the act. We both sat awkwardly for a moment. Without any explanation, Melanie looked away and returned to her previous position on the pew. I was confused, but I decided not to press the issue. Again, I thought back to Grandma telling me that if someone wants you to know something, they'll tell you. That being said, I decided to mind my business. As luck, or lack thereof, would have it, it was a fellowship Sunday. For all of you who didn't grow up in church, Fellowship Sunday is when everyone meets after church to eat and to be in each other's company. I never cared for being in anyone's company, but Fellowship Sunday always provided me with the opportunity to skip cooking. This particular one took place outside at the picnic tables. More often than not, the tables were set aside for adults and some were set aside for children. Sitting at the children's table gave me another opportunity to be in Melanie's company. I was already seated when Melanie flopped down beside me. She flashed a guilty smile as she slid next to me on the bench. I returned the smile, but only to make her feel comfortable. After a few moments, Melanie blurted out, "I'm sorry." I wasn't expecting an apology, but I accepted it nonetheless. "It's okay," I said. Apparently, my acceptance made her more comfortable than I had anticipated. She asked if she could tell me something. Melanie had the look you have when you need to tell someone something before you explode. I imagine that's how I looked when I first started confiding in Sharon. "Sure," I said. "But," she exclaimed, "you have to promise to keep it to yourself." I told her that I wouldn't say anything. By that time, I was intrigued. There's nothing better than a good secret, right? Melanie leaned over and whispered in my ear. "I have a boyfriend," she said. I wasn't surprised that she had a boyfriend. I also wasn't surprised that it was a secret. Even though Ron's church was a lot more accepting than Grandma's, most Southern churches were still resistant when it came to teen dating. I was about to offer my congratulations, but she quickly dropped her second bomb before I was able to do so. She, again, whispered in my ear. "We are having sex," she said. Again, I wasn't surprised. I was considered to be one of the good girls, and I was having sex. I really didn't put anything past anyone. I couldn't. Melanie reached into her notebook and retrieved the photo that she had snatched away an hour earlier. She looked around, as if we were involved in an illegal drug transaction. She tapped my leg, signaling for me to look under the table. Melanie flipped over the picture, just as I was looking down. To my surprise, the picture was of Melanie. She was sitting on the lap of a guy. She was wearing a bra and panties, and he was wearing boxers. Both Melanie and the guy were posed with their middle fingers extended. She quickly put the picture back into her notebook. "My cousin is the only one that knows," she said. She took the picture. I was simultaneously shocked and mortified. First of all, Melanie didn't seem like the type of girl who would agree to pose partially undressed. Secondly, she wasn't just with any guy. She was with my guy. Melanie was with Ken. I was immediately saddened and angry. My mind was bombarded with thoughts and questions, but I decided that it was best not to show my hand. "Ain't he cute?" she asked. Yeah, I thought. He's cute and he's mine. But instead of expressing my true feelings, I simply agreed that he was attractive. But that wasn't enough for me. I had to know more. "How long have you been with him?" I asked. Melanie did what I call the dish the dirt thing. It's when someone excitedly clasps their hands together while they smile and lean in closely. There's a universal understanding that you're about to hear something juicy. She proceeded to tell me that they had met a few months prior at a party. She told me that she had given Ken her phone number, but she hadn't heard anything from him. For some reason that she didn't care to ask, he called her about a month prior to our conversation. Apparently, he came to visit, and they had sex on that same day. Melanie told me that he had been to her house every Friday since, and they'd had sex each time. 3 thoughts entered into my mind. 1, even though I wasn't fond of having sex with Ken, I was angry that he was doing it with someone else. 2, it had taken Ken all that time to touch me, yet he was comfortable enough to have sex with her on that same day. Present day, I know that Ken's reasons had nothing to do with comfort, but back then, his actions made me feel that he desired me less than he desired her. 3, it was obvious that Friday was their day. He gave her a day. I thought that was our thing. Knowing that he had done the same with her made it feel less special, but I again swallowed my feelings and continued on with my interrogation. "Aren't you afraid you'll get caught?" I asked. "Nah," she said. "Both Mom and Dad leave for around 6 o'clock. Mom gets home around 4 p.m. and Dad gets home around 6 p.m. I send a message to his pager and he comes over at 12. Well, that's 4. I didn't even know he had a pager. I asked Melanie what she and Ken did all day. She told me that Ken would come over and leave immediately after having sex. I was so upset. I couldn't change the situation, but I could certainly try to change the narrative. That doesn't sound like much of a relationship, I said. She agreed to dish the dirt again, and her explanation did nothing to coddle my feelings. Well, he's not really my boyfriend, she said. Actually, he has a girlfriend. I gasped. Melanie knew about me. Well, not about me, but she knew about the existence of someone. Ken told her that they couldn't be exclusive because he had a girlfriend, but things weren't going well. I was so angry with him, but once again, I was angrier with the girl. I was bothered by her willingness to accept things as they were. I thought about my situation with Brandon. Even in the 7th grade, Toya Boone had standards. At the very least, she made Brandon choose between she and I. Willingly being number 2 was unfathomable to 15-year-old Shelonda. Unfortunately, adult Shelonda didn't always adhere to those standards, but that's a different story. Melanie told me that even though Ken had a girlfriend, she didn't feel bad for sleeping with him. It was her fullest intention to take him away from his girlfriend, from me. I vividly remember her voice as she spoke to me. If she was doing her job, he wouldn't be coming to me. That phrase would play a part in my life for many years, but that day, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I let Melanie talk and I took it all in. She told me that she kept her notebook under her mattress as her parents wouldn't ever think to look there. She made me promise to never let the information leave my lips. And I agreed. I wouldn't ever let it leave my lips. We ate the rest of our meal, and I excused myself to collect some things from Ron's office. I retrieved the items and went back outside without being noticed. I started a new conversation with Melanie, as if nothing had ever happened. What school do you go to? What's your favorite subject? Blah, blah, blah. I digested all of her information, being ever so careful not to feed her any of my own. Finally, fellowship was over, and not a moment too soon. I'd had more than my desired intake of Melanie for the day. I was still fuming by the time we returned home, but I had to pretend that everything was fine. How could I explain that I was upset over the boyfriend that I wasn't even supposed to have? I had the hardest time falling asleep that night. I knew I would take Cassidy to the park the next day. By default, I would see Ken. I didn't know what I would say to him, but I definitely had a lot of questions. A confrontation was necessary. I closed my eyes and prayed for the thoughts to cease their constant intrusion into my mind. Eventually, I fell asleep. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.